Well, hello and welcome. Good afternoon. Tonight we're really happy to have two new student videographers from PUC, Sam and Katya, so welcome. And they're going to be making the video that we usually make of these lectures and then we post to YouTube. So we plan to do that. Today we're experimenting with 3 cameras instead of 2. So one will be periodically maybe taking some video of the audience, so this could be your big chance for fame. But if anyone has a problem with it, I sure hope you don't, because I don't know what to do about that. So after tonight's lecture, I wanted to let you know that we're going to open up the museum next door. We have a new exhibit that we'd like you to take a look at. The exhibit is entitled City of Immigrants, and it documents the time period from 1820 to 1920. There was a 100-year kind of historic mass immigration that really kind of populated this valley. So the exhibit focuses on like the food, leisure activities, the early businesses, the community organizations, and religion. And in the center of so when you come in, you'll see a timeline on the wall, right when you walk in. Take a chance, some time to look at that timeline. I think it's very interesting, and I found some surprises when I actually looked at the order of the different immigrant groups that came to the valley. And then just walk clockwise around the room and take a look at the posters and some of the artifacts. And then in the middle, we have 16 kiosks that are set up, and they highlight 16 different immigrant families that played an important role in the settling of the St. Helena area. So one of those families was the Taplin family, and tonight we're pleased to have our speaker, Dr. Stephen Taplin. Stephen grew up in the 50s and 60s as one of 3 Taplin children in St. Helena. By the time he graduated from high school in 1969, he could not wait to get to a place where no one knew him. He went to UC Berkeley, then UC Davis Medical School, and on to a residency in family medicine in Rochester, New York. He practiced half-time medicine and half-time cancer screening research for 20 years in a large managed care organization in Seattle. He moved to Bethesda, Maryland, where he worked at the National Cancer Institute in 2003. Stephen has published 175 articles focused on cancer screening and conducted peer-reviewed research in Seattle before retiring from the National Cancer Institute in 2019. He was a professor at the University of Washington, Department of Family Medicine, and senior scientist at the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, before returning here to manage Taplin Cellars Winery with his family. He is now happy to be home, sculpting in stone, making wine, and enjoying the beauty of this valley and thinking about history. Steve.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you all here. It's nice it's really comforting to have people in the audience, so I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming. We're going to manage, I guess, from here, right? Okay. So, my family's been around the United States for quite a while. There's actually 10 generations in the United States. 7 of those generations are here in the valley now. We're just one example. So I'm a scientist and a researcher, and I understand how limited anecdotes are. But anecdotes are a lot of fun, and anecdotes help us understand and see. So we're one family. I know we're an anecdote, but there are some things that happen, and we can talk about and think about as you hear our story, what it had to do with your family, how it had to do with what happened in the United States. But my family was involved in the Revolution. They moved west in the 1850s, and during the time that gold was being discovered, and they settled in Napa County, moved north from San Francisco in 1871, bought property on the Silverado Trail, but actually moved here in 1866 and bought property in 1871. And then there are 7 generations, 2 of which are at the very back of the room right now. That's my son and my grandsons, lest there be any confusion. So the beginning was establishing the eastern United States. My great-grandfather, my great times 6 grandfather, John Taplin, served as a colonel in the British Army. So he was working for the king, and the king appreciated his help and gave him land in Vermont, where he worked on establishing Corinth, Vermont, as a locality. He served as a judge and moderator for several years. He was a prominent citizen in that area until they decided that they wanted to move with the rest of the colonies out of the domain of the King of England. And he would not take up arms against the king, since the king had been so good to him. So he fled town and moved to Canada and became, actually was looked down upon in the community because he would not support the revolution. His son, however, did join the revolution, so there was some obvious family discord, and he was a scout for John G. Bailey's company. But John Taplin was not a complete fool, and he did send down a little note, say, when you get it all over and you have your own Congress, may I make no doubt, cheerfully join in whatever measures and directions the Honorable Congress may point out. So he didn't want to burn his bridge completely. He was ready to go back and obey the rules if it all worked out. It was his great-grandson, John Orange Taplin, who was a Vermont dairyman and moved west to San Francisco in the 1850s. That's basically the story. The rest is all some detail and some good pictures, so if anybody want to charge out now, you can. But it'll be on video. So why did he move west? Well, when he was settled in Vermont, Vermont had developed a strong agricultural foundation. They had grains, they had cattle, they had dairy, but the Industrial Revolution also started about that time, and the Industrial Revolution resulted in the development of mills where they could weave large volumes. So wool prices started to go up, and there was this great wool from Spain that started coming in to serve the mills, and as a result, the state of Vermont developed a tariff that would keep wool prices up and support the local wool farmers against the Spanish merino wool. Bottom line was it became much more lucrative to be a sheep farmer than it was to be a dairyman. So the sheep farmers were buying up all the land. This actually scared the people of Vermont, and the editor of the newspaper there said, "Beware of the Western fever, and above all, sell not your farms to your rich neighbors for sheep pastures." So they were a little worried they were going to lose their dairy farms to this mania. Unfortunately, or fortunately for me, John Orange Taplin caught the fever and left Vermont. So he crossed the plains with an ox team in 1849. So he's walking, and I don't know how many of you have driven across the United States, but it's a long haul. It's a long haul. So I would not want to be walking it, but he walked it, and he got to San Francisco, where he fell in love. His wife, Louisa B. Hunt, was living in San Francisco with her brother, Daniel Hunt, and if you've heard of Hunt Avenue along by the Safeway, that's named after this family, the Hunt family, that bought, and I'll show you, bought a bunch of property here. But he was living with them, so he met his wife-to-be, Louisa B. Hunt. That's from the census in San Francisco. That's the actual census. they were living in this area called Area 11, and it's on the bay side. If you look at a map or a picture here, look at this picture, you can kind of see the areas that are more open in the city. This is a picture of a drawing in 1850, and they were in, I believe that they were down a little bit down in in this area down here, the more open area. And they had a for-real dairy. This is an open space. This is by the area where they were, Mission Dolores. So they had quite a bit of room. But it didn't always stay that way, and they knew that it was going to get crowded. The people were moving in after the gold rush, and they were right. That's where that Mission Dolores and the area around where they were now, obviously it's not a great place to graze cattle. So Louisa B. Hunt was from an Eastern family. She had cranberries. Her family were cranberry farmers. They married in 1861. She turned out to be a really tough, persistent lady, as you'll see, and because of that, my mother gave me her last name as my middle name. So I'm Stephen Hunt Taplin after this family. Daniel Otis Hunt, her brother, got a large tract of land here in St. Helena in 1861, and that's when they started to get the idea that maybe they could move north from San Francisco and get out of the crowded area and find more open ground. So they moved north to avoid the crowds. The other thing about crowds that you'll see, and they established this dairy along the Silverado Trail. The house is actually still there. You can still see it. And the creamery is still there. It's a stone building. I can show you at the end if you want to see it. But this is the house they built. And the problem was that one of the reasons they moved, and I don't know exactly why they moved, but at the time there was a lot of TB in the city. As it got crowded, the spread of TB became easier and easier. And this is a picture of a ward in San Francisco where they were taking care of people with TB. Today we don't think about TB because we have good treatments for it. But back then it was a killer, and it actually killed my great-great-grandfather, John Taplin. So he got here, was here for a little while, and died of consumption. This is the house that is still there along the Silverado Trail. This is John Orange Taplin Jr., and this is Louisa B. Hunt. She is holding Mildred Taplin. This is my grandfather, Albert Taplin. This is my great aunt, Mabel. And great aunt Mabel became a teacher at the Spring Valley School. So Taplin Road is where my family was. If you go along the Silverado Trail, you run into Taplin Road. There is a schoolhouse there, right at the entrance, right at the junction of Taplin Road and the Silverado Trail. There's a green building with a little cupola on the top. That's a schoolhouse, and that was the Spring Valley School. So somebody in the Historical Society, we got a bunch of these registries recently, and they handed this to me. It turns out that my Aunt Mabel here was the teacher for my Aunt Mildred in 1919. So what they were doing there along the trail was opening a creamery. And the creamery was bought by my great-great-grandfather before he died. And he died in 1877 of TB, as we just talked. And they had about 275 acres. 138 were cultivators. They had grains, mostly grains. And then they also had a creamery where they were making butter. And they would get a lot of there. So they had 138 cultivated acres, and they had 100 head of cattle, and they had the creamery where they would get 4,000 to 6,000 pounds of milk a day and turn it into 2 to 3 tons or 2 to 3 tons of milk, which they would then turn in to make 200 pounds of butter. And they did that every day. Now, I'm sure that's a lot of work when you've got a full set of people working with you. But when you lose your husband, you got a challenge on your hands. And that's what she was facing. What is she going to do without a husband, and her income depended on turning this milk into butter? So was she going to manage the farm alone? No. She luckily had thought ahead, or luckily had children. I don't know if she was thinking about it, but she had them. So she had 13, they were ages 3 to 13. So that's, the 13-year-old can help, the 3-year-old's not going to be a help, obviously. But William Hunt, John Orange, and Clara Cutter and Daniel Otis are the 4 descendants of John Orange Taplin and Louisa B. Hunt. They were there and they helped out. So they had to milk the cows, they had to package the milk, they had to churn the butter, they had to deliver the butter into St. Helena. And the other thing about it, the delivering butter into St. Helena that we don't think about now is those quaint little stone bridges that we all drive over and sweat that there's a truck going to be coming the other way. Those bridges weren't there when they were delivering milk. So they would go up and find a place where they could ford the stream, or they would take a boat, and they had a boat on a wire. They could run it across to the other side, and the cattle, the wagon would be on the other side on the St. Helena side of the river, and they would then put the milk in there and distribute it. So it was a big deal. She had a lot of work to do to manage, and she also, because she had a lot of work to do, she did not want to lose her labor force. So she built a school. And this is the school at the junction of Taplin Road and the Silverado Trail, where she also hired a teacher and made sure that her boys got educated and also worked for her. This is the Silverado Trail. Now you might wonder, why is it called a trail? But I think this tells you why it's called a trail. That's our cattle, or their cattle, walking along the Silverado Trail back then. This is the whole family together. So they had other people. This is a Taplin, this is a Taplin, and this is John Orange Taplin, this junior. Notice that senior is gone already, so this is after 1877. This is my grandfather. This is Albert John Taplin. I don't know if anybody know my grandfather. Did any of you? Yeah. Oh, Steve Erickson. Yeah. And John Sales. Yeah. Good. Well, he was a nice guy. He was a hard worker. He was pretty tall. Also in town when I grew up were these two people. This person is Mildred, the little baby you saw before. She's grown up a little bit. This is Mildred, and I believe this is Aunt Mabel Taplin. She married Oscar Anderson, who ran the local gas station in the 60s. This is Dan Otis Taplin, a brother of John, in the wagon saying J.O. Taplin and delivering milk into St. Helena. I don't know where that is, but it's in St. Helena. And this is the two of them. This is John Orange Taplin Jr., the guy you just saw. This is when they got married, and Frances St. Ors, his wife-to-be. So Louisa B. Hunt was this guy's mother. He married. He was running around town here, and one time when I was a kid, he was telling this story. This after he'd been railing about all the teenagers in town doing all kinds of crazy things. He told me the story about how he and his brother-in-law, or a friend of his, Lester Lewelling, would get down in town and get at one end of the town during the rainy season, when there would be two big tracks from the wagons going down the muddy main street, right? And they would wait for the policeman to be at the other end of the city, and then they would race down one track down Main Street at as high a speed as they could get and run right by the policeman, who would then be pissed, right? So they would get to the end, turn around. He would get on his motorcycle to chase them in the same rut. They would jump the other side of the street, get in the opposite rut, and be going the opposite direction as fast as they could. So this is my grandfather telling me the story about how they would cut up in downtown St. Helena after he was railing against all of these teenagers. So, you know, things are still challenging. This is the walnut trees that these are an example of walnut trees. They're not his field. This is my grandfather with the walnut trees, and he was doing some trimming. There were mostly walnut trees and prunes when I was a kid here in St. Helena, because they had pulled all the grapes out during Prohibition and replaced them with walnuts. So most of us at that time in the 60s were picking walnuts to make money. This is Albert, my grandfather's. This is the Lewelling family. This is Harvey Lewelling. He's also a photographer. This is the guy that's the photographer, Harvey Lewelling. This is my grandmother. This is Frances St. Ors. And this is sitting in front of the shop and what we call the big house, the Lewelling house I'll show you a picture of that in a second. This is a Lewelling house. This was built in 1870. It's still standing, barely, but it's standing. And its foundation are what are called one-man rocks, a rock that somebody could pick up, move in, set it down on the ground, put a 4x4 on the top of it, and then build a house. So it's got no foundation, just these one-man rocks. Yeah, it's a scary thing. This is my grandmother sitting in front of, anybody know what this is? Oh, Steve, there is somebody who knows. Steve Erickson, who was the only guy who grew up with me around here, and we've been up. And this is to get into a carriage, into a carriage, horse carriage, not a horseless carriage, a horse carriage. So these are the two motorcycles I was just telling you about that would race back and forth on Main Street. These are Excelsior motorcycles. This is my grandfather and my grandmother, and this is Lester Lewelling, and this is Lillian, and I'm not sure what her last name was, but they are married. So people got along, did a lot of things. But when they got married, so people got along pretty well then. At least that's what they say. When they got married, when my parents got married, or my grandparents got married, they needed a house. So what they did was, there was a house up on the Lewelling property where that was sitting up high. It was back a little bit back, but it was up there. So what they did was give the house and some property to my grandmother when my grandparents got married. So this is them taking the house and lifting it up so that they can then move it down the Lewelling Lane to our house, or to its present location. So this is the winch. This is a winch. They had this on some rollers, lifted up on some rollers, and they winched it. They literally would go around this way and wrap the rope around here and pull it down the road. They pulled it all the way down from the hill and to its current location. That's the same house right there. It's where my grandsons, that's right, they know that house. My grandsons and my son are living in that house now with their mother, Tony. My grandfather raised turkeys, but they also planted the walnut trees. So there were walnut trees and turkeys on the property back in the 60s and the 50s to make ends meet. Obviously, the wine business was not here. this is him feeding, and he would, you know, he would also, and this was also something that was quite different. So they would harvest the turkeys. There's still nails in the basement of that big house where they would hang the turkey to pluck them, and then they would load them in this fastidious truck and drive to San Francisco to sell the turkeys. Now, Kathy Cooling is an infectious disease expert. She, I don't think it takes an expert to know that might be a little bit dicey. But they did it. They got away with it. I never heard of any illness. My grandparents, luckily, had a boy, a son, my father. And this is my father here in between. I'm sitting on a truck between Laurie Wood and Bob Wood. Laurie Wood is a famous viticulturalist. He worked here in the valley for many years, but they were close. They were good friends. That was taken right up in front of the big house on the hill. So relationships, you know, the other thing about growing up here and being here for a long time is that there are these long-term relationships, and families have relations with families over time. It's a great benefit that I hope some of you get to enjoy if you stick around. This is my father. They lived, when my grandparents first got married, they lived in the big house. And this is my father standing on that same thing where you saw my grandmother, the carriage step. And this is my father just before he died in 2013, standing on the same step. He's grown up. So when you start to put it all together, there are 7 generations here. John Orange Taplin, the senior, who died of tuberculosis. And then John Orange Taplin Jr., the man who you saw in the creamery or at the dairy with his family all around in front of the house. And then my grandfather, Albert John Taplin. Then my dad, Kenneth Taplin. So that's the first 4 generations here in the valley. Then my father married Alice Gaylord Taplin. The Gaylords were actually interesting people too. My grandfather, my grandmother's father was William Gaylord. He came here from Berkeley to be the principal of the high school, and then he got into deep trouble because he put a lot of money into a gym and built a gym for sports. And it was way beyond the expected budget of the city's expected budget. So some things have not changed. It's always... This is where my parents met. They were playing they met in St. Helena, but they performed together in this band. And that's my mom and my dad. So, yeah.
Is that the 1930s?
I think my dad must be about, what do you think? How old do you think he is? He 8 or 9, yeah, somewhere around there. So he was born in 21, so yeah, that's about 30s, yeah. And then my parents had 3 children, as was mentioned in the introduction, my sister, my brother, Bill, and myself. My sister is the oldest. She's actually already passed away from breast cancer, and really difficult thing, because that's where I did all of my research. All of my research has been on cancer screening and finding cancer early, which she did. She found cancer early, but it killed her eventually. So that's the 5th, and then the 6th generation is just moved into that house. That's my son Adam back there with his, the next generation, the 7th generation, Edward, who's not here, Alex and Ben. Alex and Ben are twins. So since, when we came here, you heard in the introduction that I couldn't wait to get out of here when I was growing up. Obviously I came back. I came back because eventually you figure out it's a nice place to be. My brother Bill is an engineer. He developed the water quality system for San Francisco. My sister managed the Superfund for the EPA in San Francisco, and I'm a primary care physician, as you heard, and then had spent a large part of my career doing cancer screening research. My cousin Doug White and the White family, they're also they're descendants of the Lewellings, and they do the farming of our grapes. So we had, ooh, this went way faster than I expected. It's good news for you. So we have people, cattle, poultry, oaks, grains, nuts, and grapes are all part of the valley history here. And my family did most of that. We had poultry, we had grains in the beginning. We certainly have oaks, and we certainly have grapes now. These are the grapes. The red building at the back is where we're in the process of developing a winery. That's a barn we built in 2006. And so, you know, I've been working on this for a while and said it was all ready, and then my wife, who is a physician and a researcher, said, "So what's the point?" So, so the answer is there's no point. There's no. I think the point for me is that out of all of this, the most important thing for me was the schoolhouse, because my father was always curious. He got through college, he went to college, but he was always curious. And my mother, who was the daughter of a high school principal, as I mentioned, was always supporting education. So I think for our family is an important part of our family and part of who we are and what we do. But beyond that, it's really hard to say, except the other one. I guess the other characteristic is persistence. We persist, and I think I've been accused of that a lot, sometimes by my wife. But so it's hard to know what's it mean to be in one family. What does one family mean? It's really hard to know. But it was really fun to have this history. This is us now making wine. This is my dad, my mom, my sister, that's me. That's our winemaker, Julian Fayard, and that's my brother. So that was 2012. We've added the 6th and 7th, so you can see my grandson Eddie back there. And I think it's really, you know, a big change since I was here, that there are now so many opportunities for people to be able to be here and stay here, because the wine industry has been so developed that there's actually a future for people. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And that's it. We've been here since 1871.
Questions? Since you said that the schoolhouse was very important to you, to learn about that, could you tell us what all happened to the schoolhouse? It's a private home now? Or
it's a private home now, yeah.
Did your family own it, or did...
My family owned all the property along the Taplin Road. They owned a lot of the property that Phelps bought. That was sold in the 40s when my grandfather got married and moved over to, or after, I guess 20 years after my grandfather got married and moved. He sold that property and then moved over with his wife, my grandmother, to Llewellyn Lane. So they had that property there, and they sold the dairy because they couldn't get any of the family to take on the dairy responsibilities. So that was the main reason they sold it. They just couldn't staff the dairy. It was a lot of hard work.
How long ago did you sell the schoolhouse? We actually had dinner there with Robin and Craig Williams.
Oh, really? I really don't know. I really don't know when it went. I think they might have sold it off separately at some point, but I don't know. I know that I think Miriam has written something about the schoolhouse. Did you write about a little bit about the schoolhouse? And
the schoolhouse is part of
who owns the smallest.
Yeah.
And that would make sense because Craig was working for Joe.
Ah, okay.
That's why he put in.
Okay. But Louisa B. Hunt, my great-great-grandfather's wife, was pretty active in the school system trying to make sure that her kids got good education. And it was before there was really a unified school district. So it was part of the development of the school district here in Napa County. And she was pretty active in that. Steve Erickson?
For anyone that might not be aware, your dad did a lengthy narrative on the Helena Historical Society website. Many local people have done that.
Oh yeah,
And
that's true.
It's really informative. It goes on much longer than you did.
There you go. There you go. So, Jack.
It seems like you've got quite a bit of a record that still exists, going back to the revolution and even earlier. Did that come down through the generations, or did you have to find that in various libraries?
A little bit of both. Most of the pictures and stuff are stuff that was passed down. And my parents and ancestors like to hold on to stuff. So we have a lot of pictures, and that's where most of the pictures came from. The story itself is harder. It's harder to find out why do people do things. That's the soft stuff that disappears, as the years go on. But my father told me stories, so I got what his version of things were. There's some stuff written in books about the creamery. That's part of what that page you saw is from a book about people and families in the Napa Valley.
And then we have to remember, if we go back 10 generations, then there are 1,024 great-great-greats across that part of the
It gets really complicated, yeah. Bonnie?
Your house that you're living in now is your father's house, correct?
Correct, yes.
And as I understand it, I could be wrong, but it's made of adobe.
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit more about
Yeah.
this.
So I always think that history is everything before I was alive, so none of that is in this presentation. The house that I live on my wife and I live on Sulphur Springs Avenue, and we live in an adobe house. So it was a house that we built when I was in high school, just before I got into high school. I was the mortar boy and my father was the mason. And we had carpenters and everything. My father basically was the contractor, but he wasn't officially the contractor. And so we built that over a 2-year period, did all of the masonry work ourselves, and then had some carpenters help us do the finish work inside. My dad did the cabinet work inside as well. He was, I think that attitude is why I'm a general practitioner and not some neurosurgeon, because I'm amused by lots of things and intrigued by lots of things and want a diverse life. And so I loved general practice because you never knew what was coming in the door. And so I think it comes from that. My father was he was pretty confident that he could do anything he decided he wanted to do or needed to do, and he took it on. So he led the way in building that house. Comments? Other questions?
Steve, you mentioned your Aunt Mabel who married Oscar Anderson, I think you said.
Mm-hmm.
Is Mabel Johnson the same Mabel?
No, that's a different Mabel. Mabel Johnson is Lewelling. She was Raymond Lewelling's sister and our great aunt. Yeah.
I think there was one over on this side.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll be back.
The stone building on Church Street, which I used to have an office in, and when you came by that.
Well, that we actually got in the probably 1880s or so. That was before Prohibition. Our family worked with the Krug family, and we were making brandy. I think it was brandy in there. That was the brandy cellar, and we have managed to hold on to that ever since. Like I said, that's why we have all the pictures. They hold on to stuff. So.
And where was that?
On Church Street. On Church Street, there's a stone building on Church Street where there's currently a dog grooming Yeah, the dog grooming place.
Maybe more recent generations, yours, but how did your parents and grandparents get through the two wars and the Depression and the adversity?
Great question. The First World War, my grandfather was farming, and he was told that he had to stay and continue to farm to support the war effort. My father actually fought in World War II, and he was a tail gunner in B-26, a plane called a B-26, which was known as the Widowmaker, because it was a slow, lumbering bomber that would fly. But yeah, luckily he made it, or I wouldn't be here. So, so that's how they got through the two wars. The Depression was harder. The Depression was really tough, and they, this is that truck. We figured out. Well, I don't know when that truck was full of turkeys, but it was basically farming and selling turkeys that helped them get through the Depression, and that's how they did it.
Couldn't put a little bottle of Sacristy wine.
They wouldn't tell their grandson about it, I'll tell you that. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Steve. There's two houses to the west of your house, the one that you live in now. One's like a smaller cottage and one's a bigger one. Is that the one that was moved?
Which one are you talking about?
That are, I think, on your property. They're to the west of your house.
There's a little cottage up at the top of the big house. What we call the big house is the Victorian-looking funny house with a very steep roof. That's the big. That's the one that was moved. That's the one that was built. That was one built. The house that was moved is way down the road. It's about 3 or 4 lots. It's about a block and a half in from Highway 29. You can't see it from where my house is. Yeah, but it's on Lewelling Lane there. Other questions, John?
Yeah, where Place Winery was up Taplin Road, was that part of the property too?
Yes, the property was. There wasn't. I don't think there was a winery there when but I don't know for sure. Is a stone building? The Lewellings were involved in wine. They were making wine in the 80s. The winery that's on Spring Street is the winery that the Lewellings developed. Yeah. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you all. It's been really fun.
That was really great. I would like to invite you to come next door. We've got the museum open. Probably takes 10 or 15 minutes to walk through this new exhibit. And we're serving wine, so come by.
Taplin wine.
And it's Taplin wine.
So the house that's on the, without the